The year is 1997. The SEGA Saturn was, let's just say, not in the best place. The PlayStation was dominating, the N64 had just dropped, Mario 64 was out on the shelves, and Sonic, well, he was about to make his grand racing debut. Sonic R was supposed to be the game that proved Sonic didn't need a cart to keep up. No wheels, no gimmicks, just pure unfiltered speed. Or at least that was the plan. What we got was one of the most bizarre, frustrating, and somehow weirdly lovable Sonic games ever made. A game with slippery controls, baffling AI, and a soundtrack that single-handedly carries the entire experience. So today, we're diving into the glorious, frustrating, and meme-worthy mess that is Sonic R. Was it ahead of its time, a failed experiment, or just one reason that Sega can't be trusted with Sonic's legs? Let's find out. Sonic R is a fascinating little time capsule of late 90s 3D graphics. Released in 1997 for the SEGA Saturn, this game came out during an awkward phase when developers were still figuring out how to do 3D properly. And boy does it show. Now let's be fair. On a technical level, Sonic R actually pushed the Saturn pretty hard. The system was notorious for being a nightmare to develop for, especially when it came to handling 3D. Yet, Sonic R manages to deliver full 3D environments, dynamic weather effects, and even reflections in water. For the SEGA Saturn, that's actually pretty impressive. But then, there's everything else. The character models, let's just say they exist. Sonic kinda looks like a low-poly stress ball. Tails has permanent expression of someone who witnessed a crime. And Knuckles, my dude looks like he's melting. And let's talk about those environments. The game's 5 tracks have this weird empty feeling, like a bunch of random objects just got dropped into a map editor with no rhyme or reason. You've got castles, pyramids, floating platforms, sometimes even in the same level. It's like the developers couldn't decide if they were making a racing game or a fever dream. And then there's the draw distance. Oh boy. If you ever wanted to feel like you're racing through a fog machine at a rock concert, Sonic R has you covered. Objects just pop in and out of nowhere, making it impossible to tell where you're going until it's too late. And considering how slippery the controls are, that's not great. But for all its weirdness, there's definitely some charm to Sonic R's graphics. It's got the classic 90s low-poly aesthetic that some people, probably the same ones who swear by CRT filters, would call retro charm. The bright colors, the weirdly shiny textures, and the fact that the game actually tried to do cool things like reflections and dynamic lighting, it gives Sonic R a distinct look, and even if it's technically a mess, it's still kind of interesting to look at. So yeah, Sonic R isn't winning any beauty contests, but it's an interesting relic of a time when Sega was throwing things at the wall to see what would stick. And in a weird way, kinda makes it beautiful. Alright, so let's talk about the story of Sonic R. And by story, I mean the barely there excuse for why Sonic and friends are even racing in the first place. See, most racing games don't need a deep story. Mario Kart never explains why Bowser is suddenly cool with taking a break from kidnapping Peach to go go-karting with Mario and them, but Sonic R? Oh, it technically has a story. And it's just as weird as you'd probably expect. According to the manual, and I swear this was written with a straight face, Dr. Robotnik sets up the race as a trap for Sonic. That's right. The entire premise is that Dr. Eggman, the same guy who has built doomsday weapons, giant death robots, and an entire space station, thought the best way to defeat Sonic was to host a racing tournament. Now I get the logic. Sonic's whole thing is speed, so maybe he figured, hey, what if I beat him at his own game? But the problem is, Sonic isn't even in a car, he's literally just running. Meaning Eggman looked at his entire rogue gallery of doomsday plans and said, nah, let's see if I can outrace this superpowered hedgehog using a go-kart. Genius move. Truly a 4D chess level strategy. And it's not just Dr. Robotnik competing either. For some reason, Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy all decided, yeah, this is totally a normal way to spend an afternoon. Meanwhile, Amy, who usually isn't fast enough to keep up, just shows up in a tiny pink car. Nobody questions it. She's the only person using the vehicle besides Eggman. But here's where things get really weird. If you manage to unlock all the hidden characters, it turns out the entire race was actually a distraction so Eggman could unleash an army of evil robot duplicates of Sonic and his friends. Which means this whole time while you were slip-sliding around the tracks, Eggman was actively creating Terminator versions of the entire Sonic cast. And honestly, that's the most Dr. Robotnik thing I've ever heard of. So at the end of the day, the story of Sonic R is basically, Eggman sets up a race to somehow trap Sonic. Sonic joins the race for fun instead of, I don't know, just stopping Robotnik. Robotnik uses the distraction to make evil robots. Sonic beats them anyways. Moral of the story? If Eggman just stopped inviting Sonic to fun activities, he might actually win once in a while. So Sonic R has a pretty standard lineup. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Eggman. Nothing too crazy, right? But then you start unlocking characters, and that's when things get really weird. First off, we've got Metal Knuckles. Because I guess Eggman thought, yeah, I'll make a knockoff of the guy who barely talks and punches things. And then there's the Tails doll. Oh boy. This thing should be a cute, harmless little robotic Tails plushie. But instead it looks like something that escaped from an abandoned Chuck E. Cheese at 3 a.m. People on the internet have turned it into this creepypasta nightmare with stories about haunted game carts and evil Tails dolls coming to steal your soul. And honestly, I get it. Just look at this thing. Why does it float? Why does it move like that? And why does it look like it knows too much? I have so many questions and I don't want no answers. Oh, and then there's Egg Robo, a literal nameless mini minion from Sonic and Knuckles who somehow got promoted to full-fledged playable character. Like, congratulations, I guess? Glad to see somebody's getting a raise. So yeah, the character roster starts out normal and then slowly descends into pure robotic chaos, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Okay, let's talk about Sonic R's sound design now, because this game has some choices. First off, the sound effects are, well, they exist. Every character has this oddly compressed voice clip that sounds like they were recorded through a tin can. Sonic shouts "yeah" every time he jumps. Knuckles grunts like he just stubbed his toe. And Eggman? Well, Eggman laughs. A lot. Like way too much. Every time he drops an item, he cackles like he just pulled off the greatest prank of all time. It's honestly kind of impressive how every sound effect in this game is just a little off. The boost pads, they make this weird whoop. Running on water, it sounds like someone smacking a wet sponge against a table. It's like the sound team just grabbed random stock effects and called it a day. But let's be real, you're not here for the sound effects, you're here for the music. And Sonic R's soundtrack is legendary. It's this hyper-cheerful Eurodance pop mix that absolutely does not belong in a racing game, but somehow it works. The moment "Can You Feel the Sunshine" kicks in, you just accept that this is your life now, and you're in Sonic R world. There's no escape. And the best part, these songs are so aggressively positive that even when you're losing horribly, slipping off the track for the 10th time, and screaming at the camera controls, the music is just all, "Don't stop, just go!" It's like the game knows you're suffering, but it's politely telling you to deal with it. At the end of the day, Sonic R's soundtrack is one of the most iconic parts of the game. Whether you generally love it or you enjoy it ironically, it's impossible to forget, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. I think the soundtrack is honestly probably the best part of the entire package. So how does the game actually play? Well, that's kind of a loaded question. The big selling point is that this isn't a kart racer. Sonic and the gang are running on foot, well, except for Amy and Eggman. It sounds like a cool idea. Sonic is all about speed, so why wouldn't he just run? But the second you touch the controls, reality begins to seep in. The movement in Sonic R is, well, slippery. Sonic doesn't just run, he glides across the track like someone buttered his shoes. Every character has this weird floating momentum that makes turning feel like steering a boat on a roller skate. You'll be holding right, trying to make a turn, and Sonic just says, "nah," and keeps going straight into a wall. And speaking of turning, oh boy, the drift system. This game has no real braking, so the only options are let go of the accelerator and pray, hold the shoulder button to drift and slide wildly off course like you're playing a Sonic-themed ice hockey game. Oh, and don't even get me started on the water physics. You can run on water. Very cool, very Sonic. But the second you slow down, well, you sink like a rock. And then you have to awkwardly jump your way out. Imagine running full speed across the lake only to trip and drown because you stopped for half a second. But Sonic R isn't just about racing. It's also a collectathon for some reason. Scattered across each track are Chaos Emeralds and Sonic tokens, and they're hidden in weird places out of the way that kind of require you to completely ignore the race to grab them. It's like the game can't decide if it wants to be a racing game or a platformer, so it just awkwardly shoves both ideas together and hopes for the best. And then there's the AI. If you think you're struggling with the controls, just watch the CPU racers. 1 second they're miles ahead, the next they're bumping into a wall like they forgot how to function. And don't even think about trying to outspeed them normally, because if you don't take every shortcut, they will magically rubber band right in front of you at the last second. So yeah, Sonic R's gameplay is a mess, and it's also kind of charming in that broken, janky way. It's frustrating, it's chaotic, but once you figure out how to bend the game's weird physics in your favor, it actually becomes fun in a kind of ridiculous way. Or maybe that's just the Stockholm Syndrome setting in, who knows, maybe send help. Alright, let's talk about the length of Sonic R. You'd think a game about racing in circles could be wrapped up in about 30 minutes, but surprisingly it isn't that short. Sure, you can breeze through the main tracks pretty quickly, but the game's not exactly going to roll out the red carpet and let you finish in style. The main story mode has 5 tracks, yeah, just 5. So if you're really good at the game, you could probably finish it in under an hour. But the thing is, Sonic R keeps throwing distractions at you. Unlockable characters, Chaos Emeralds, things that keep you coming back for more. Unlocking characters is definitely the game's way of saying, hey, please don't quit after 30 minutes. The more you race, the more you unlock. Metal Knuckles, Tails Doll, and even Egg Robo. So there's definitely a reason to keep playing if you're the type who just has to collect everything. But here's the catch. Sonic R doesn't have the same level of depth that other racers like Mario Kart or something like that would. You're racing the same handful of tracks over and over again, and while each character has their own feel, the tracks don't really change. The novelty wears off a little faster than a pair of Sonic-themed shoes. And then there's the replayability factor, which kind of is a double-edged sword. If you're really into the game, the satisfaction of unlocking all the characters and finding the hidden Chaos Emeralds and perfecting your laps will keep you coming back, but after a while you likely hit the, wait, I've already done this already moment. To really squeeze out some replayability and maybe make the game a little bit longer, you'll have to take on time trials and see how fast you can finish a lap. And if you're anything like me, you'll end up smashing the controller because you missed the shortcut again! It's also worth mentioning the multiplayer mode, which, surprise, actually adds a lot of fun, especially when you have friends over. It's competitive, chaotic, and a little ridiculous, but hey, it's what makes it fun. Also, if you have friends, don't put them through this. I beg of you, please don't make them play Sonic R. That is a torture beyond belief. At the end of the day, Sonic R is not a game you'll be playing for hundreds of hours, but for a short burst of frantic, colorful racing, it'll keep you coming back just long enough to wonder if you've truly become one with the chaos. Or it could just be the Stockholm Syndrome again. So as far as a release and ports for Sonic R, the game was released in 1997 for the SEGA Saturn. Sonic R was part of Sega's push to make the Saturn a thing in North America. Spoiler alert, it didn't really work out. The Saturn was already struggling in the US with its weird, complicated architecture and lack of third-party support. Sonic R, despite being a fun little racing game, didn't exactly make waves. It was like throwing a cool party at someone's house and no one knows about it. It had potential, but the crowd just didn't show up. The game ended up becoming somewhat of a cult classic. People didn't play it for years and years, but then the ones who did, oh, they remember it, with its weird floaty controls and wild Eurodance soundtrack. Sonic R didn't just fade into obscurity. It was that bizarre gem that people loved to talk about, even if it wasn't a blockbuster hit. After its initial release on the SEGA Saturn, Sonic R didn't just disappear into the archives of gaming history. No, it came back. Kind of like that one friend who keeps showing up at every party uninvited. In 1998, Sonic R was ported to PC, which was actually a decent move. With the PC version, you got some improvements in terms of graphics, and it was more accessible for people who didn't own a Saturn. However, the port didn't exactly change much in terms of gameplay. The awkward controls and quirky physics, still there. PC version wasn't a game changer, but hey, they let you play it on your desktop while you pretended you were getting work done. Then, in 2004, Sonic R popped up again on the GameCube and PlayStation 2 as part of Sonic Gems collection. This was part of a collection of classic Sonic games, which means you could finally experience Sonic R without needing a dusty old Saturn. It wasn't really a major remaster, but it did bring the game to a new generation of gamers who were curious about Sonic R's charm, or lack thereof. Unfortunately, despite the re-releases, Sonic R never had a major revival. It remains one of those games that's fun to revisit for the memes and the weird nostalgia, but not something that's going to get the Sonic Mania treatment anytime soon. Still, its ports gave the game a chance to live on, even if it didn't change the fact that it's always going to be that weird Sonic racing game that people remember with a mix of funness and confusion. Despite Sonic R being a bit of a quirky niche title, it's actually become somewhat of a collectible gem in recent years. Thanks to its association with the SEGA Saturn, a console that, let's face it, didn't get nearly as much love as it deserved, Sonic R has been creeping up in value for those looking to relive the glory days of 90s gaming. If you're trying to get your hands on an original SEGA Saturn copy, prepare to pay a premium. These babies can go for anywhere between $50 to $100, or more depending on condition and whether you're looking to try to find it complete in box. And don't even think about buying one without checking if it's got its case and manual, because having the complete package can jack up that price even more. It's like buying a second-hand car, but the car is Sonic R and it's got a lot of nostalgia attached to it. Now, if you're hunting for a copy of Sonic R for the PC, you might catch a slight break. It's usually a bit cheaper, around the $20 to $40 range. But good luck finding a pristine copy with the original box and manual. Most PC versions end up being listed for download keys or in a bundle with other old PC games. But if you want the actual disc and physical extras, be prepared to dig through a lot of eBay listings. On the flip side, if you're more of a Sonic R nostalgia hunter and just want to play it on a modern console, the GameCube and PS2 versions in the Sonic Gems collection are more affordable, usually priced around $15 to $30. They're still collectible, but without that true SEGA Saturn magic, so you're not going to be hitting those big ticket prices anytime soon. But for those true Sonic R fanatics who absolutely need to own everything, be prepared for the wild world of SEGA Saturn collectors. The game's price can fluctuate dramatically based on demand, condition, and the fact that some people have made it their life's mission to complete every obscure game in the Sonic franchise. So if you find a copy for under $50, consider yourself lucky, maybe even lucky enough to feel the sunshine. Okay, let's get real for a second. Sonic R might not have set the gaming world on fire in the way some of Sonic's other titles did, but its legacy? Well, that's an entirely different story. Even though Sonic R was a one-off racing experiment that never quite hit mainstream success, it somehow managed to stay in the public eye for all the wrong reasons. Sure, Sonic R never went to define the racing genre like Mario Kart did, and it didn't exactly spawn any sequels, but its quirky, low-poly, low-key chaos has cemented it as a classic. And let's be real, it has one of the most iconic soundtracks in all of gaming. Who doesn't think of Can You Feel the Sunshine when they think about Sonic R? It's practically a meme at this point, and that's a legacy in of itself. In fact, the game's unique charm and eccentricities have helped it maintain its spot in Sonic fandom lore. It's like that weird, awkward cousin you don't talk about in family reunions, but you still secretly love. Fans look back at it fondly, and sometimes with a little regret, as a bold experiment in Sonic history, one that didn't quite go the way anyone expected, but boy did it stick with people. For all its jankiness, it proved that Sonic could attempt to do something different. Sure, it was a wild ride that never fully stuck, but it paved the way for future racing games like SEGA All-Star Racings and Sonic Racing Transformed. If you look hard enough, you can actually see little traces of Sonic R in these later games. Not in terms of controls or mechanics, thankfully, but in its willingness to try something new, even if it meant crashing hard in the process. And let's not forget about the memes. Because of its wild graphics, bizarre physics, and the ever so memorable soundtrack, Sonic R has become a treasure trove of content for meme lords everywhere. Whether it's Sonic spinning out of control, Knuckles doing his best WWE promo, or just someone shouting Supersonic Racing. In the grand scheme of Sonic's legacy, Sonic R might not be the first game people mention, but it's certainly not forgotten. It's the underdog that stayed, the weird experiment that managed to worm its way into the hearts of fans, and the racing game that's been laughed at, loved, and cherished for its sheer absurdity. So yeah, Sonic R. It's not just a game, it's a mood, a vibe, a very questionable time in the Sonic franchise that people just can't forget. And that's a wrap, folks. We've zoomed through the quirky, colorful world of Sonic, from the funky graphics to the unforgettable soundtrack and those questionable voice lines. This game didn't hold back, for better or worse. If you made it through this ride without feeling like you've spun out of control, congrats! Sonic R may not be the best racing game ever made, but it's certainly one of the most memorable. Whether it's a chuckle, a facepalm, or a rush of nostalgia, it's certainly one of the worst first-party Sega games I've ever played, but it's not irredeemable. Before you race off to find your own copy, or fire up some Supersonic Racing, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you never miss another journey into the wacky world of gaming. And hey, if you've got any Sonic R memories or thoughts, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear what y'all think. Until next time, keep on racing, keep on laughing, and remember, can you feel the sunshine? Because we sure can.